the backstory, my parents came to the United States after the Vietnam War. They escaped on a boat. Survival rates for escaping from communism post the Vietnam War on a little fishing boat was about 50%. Most people, half of people died. It was like such a painful and arduous way of getting here that, a lot of people elected or just couldn't really, discuss it with their kids. So growing up, I always had this deep sense of like, man, I'm so lucky to be alive. I'm so lucky to be in the States. America is the best country in the world. And so it's created this country of largely bred for entrepreneurship. Like the aha moment for me, it was like 2 a.m. It's like an overnight shift. I saw a man who had an ulcer on his foot from a history of poorly controlled diabetes. The ulcer had become infected and we had to amputate his leg that night. And I still remember talking to the first person, why didn't you come in like a day ago, 2 days ago to get this looked at? If you had come in earlier, we could have saved your leg probably.
Today, I am incredibly privileged to be joined by a special guest. He is a distinguished Harvard graduate, where he studied economics. Following undergrad, he went on to Harvard Medical School to earn his Doctor of Medicine. And during that time, he also managed to start his own company and co-founded Buoy Health. Ladies and gentlemen, Andrew Lay. Andrew, thank you so much for being here today with me. It's an honor and a privilege. And before we dive into the genesis of Buoy and why you ultimately decided to pivot away from a career as a physician to lead this company, I would love to understand just, what was the foundation that was set for you by your family, to be able to pursue, a Harvard education and to start your own company ultimately.
Thanks, George. Well, it's a privilege to be here. So thanks for inviting me. And yeah, I mean, you're right. A lot of, I guess, the decisions I made in life stem from kind of the foundation that my family laid. I think that through line is I've always felt this urgency to take risks. But further, the risk is not for just for the sake of taking risk. It's more of trying to take the path that maximizes the opportunity, I guess. So the backstory, my parents, I'm Vietnamese by ethnicity, grew up in Houston. My parents came to the United States after the Vietnam War. They escaped on a boat. They actually, crazy enough, met on the boat, which is another story.
Wow.
Like how they came to get together. But
Wow.
the survival rates for escaping from communism post the Vietnam War on a little fishing boat was about 50%. So most people, half of people died. They faced running out of fuel, capsizing, storms, pirates. It was like a really treacherous journey. And my parents, from like my earliest ages, like always like talked about that journey. I think I was really fortunate in that I've met other people of my generation whose parents also escaped who didn't talk about it. It was like such a painful and arduous way of getting here that, a lot of people elected or just couldn't really, discuss it with their kids. And I think I was just really lucky. My parents talked about it all the time. And so growing up, I always had this deep sense of like, man, I'm so lucky to be alive. I'm so lucky to be in the States. And around like 7th, 8th grade, they took us to Vietnam for the first time. Vietnam today is like very developed, looks like Hong Kong or Taiwan and, very modern. When they took us, it was still kind of just opened up to the outside world. And so, I met my cousins, looked exactly like me,
Wow.
but they were, didn't have any of the opportunities that we had here in the States. And it just like really imprinted, that sense of like, man, I'm
Hmm.
so lucky. So anyways, going back to like my decisions, coming out of high school, for instance, I
Hmm.
had opportunities to go places where, I had a full ride. Um, I had medical school guaranteed. I had medical school paid for, like coming out of high school,
Hmm.
which were just, as someone who wanted to be a doctor, it was kind of like the dream. I didn't have to worry about an MCAT, didn't have to worry about paying for anything.
Hmm.
But I luckily, got into Harvard, and which is, you know, um, has financial aid, but doesn't have, merit-based scholarships.
Hmm.
And I just can like through my myself at my parents and just be like, hey, please let me go. Like, I
Yeah.
understand it's not free. I
Hmm.
understand that I'm gonna have to take out loans, that I'm gonna have to pay back. And I understand I have a safer path, but
Yeah.
you didn't have it. You didn't take the safer path. You could have just stayed in Vietnam.
True.
Could have just, you know, figured out a life there. But
Hmm.
you took a very dangerous path
Yeah.
to largely to maximize their own potential as human beings and
Hmm.
also maximize the potential of their children.
Yeah.
I felt like, I mean, I'm not going to die. I mean,
Right.
like,
Sh-
as like it's not a life or death decision to go to
Sure.
school there, so why
Mhm.
not give me that opportunity? And luckily they understood and let me go. And fast forward 5 years from then, or sorry, 7 years from then, I was about to finish med school and
Mhm.
kind of had the same like, oh man, I see this opportunity. So many people struggle to make healthcare decisions. What if we built this AI that kind of put the power or the brain of a doctor in the hands of the average person so they can make decisions on their own? Um, and I came to my parents kind of same discussion, like, hey, I feel like I should do this.
Mhm.
It's very risky. I understand I'm already on a safe path. I could just go
Yeah.
be a doctor. I know what my my opportunities are there, but this just
Right.
feels something I have to do. And, they once again kind of
Yeah.
supported me and allowed me to go do that. And I think, even to this day, when it comes to making decisions for the company, for better or for worse, I've largely constantly just thought about like value maximization,
Mhm.
not from like an economic perspective, but from like a impact to
Mm.
society,
Humanity. Yeah.
on this limited time I have on Earth. What's
Yeah.
the best thing I could do for, in my short time here. So,
Right.
anyways,
Um,
yeah, totally agree that what happened with my parents largely
mhm.
influenced every decision I've made.
If I may ask, how old were they when they fled to the US?
My dad was 24 and my
Wow.
mom was 22.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's incredible. I had a previous guest who's they had family, fleeing Cuba. And one of the parallels I'm noticing is that, you guys as first generation like are incredibly grateful. And I
Mhm.
think you guys are like really seize the moment and seize opportunities, unlike other people who maybe have been here for multiple generations, and there's less of a sense of urgency, right? And I just really value you guys' perspective and your willingness to do good in the world. And because you guys appreciate what you have versus what your parents didn't have early on. So much respect. uh
Thanks. Yeah, I
yeah,
actually, sorry, I just to
of
interject. I appreciate you saying that.
course.
We're actually expecting our first kid in the next couple
Congrats.
weeks. Thanks. Yeah.
Wow, congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, she's not here yet. But
Yeah.
I think the thing one of the things I'm most worried about is how do I pass on that urgency and that sense of like
Yeah.
gratefulness we're describing?
Yeah.
Because for the most part, to your point, America is the best country in the world
Mm.
because we're nothing but it's like a selection bias. It's like
Yeah.
all these people who took risks to come
Yeah.
here, you know. Um,
Yeah.
and so it's created this country of largely bred for entrepreneurship and
Yeah.
like maximizing like the potential that you have, which is just incredible. Like the fact that this country exists is like unbelievable. But I have felt and seen, the further you are from that like immigrant story,
Hmm.
the harder it is to connect with that. And the immigrant story creates such a sense of urgency that it's almost like a benefit to be closer.
Yeah.
And so I
Certainly.
think a lot about that, like with my daughter's name is going to be Max. I think about like with Max, like how do I help her
Yeah.
feel close to that urgency, like I was able, to have when I was growing
Yeah.
up.
Yeah. Well, man, it sounds like your parents gave you an awesome example of how to do that, and so I think you'll for sure figure it out. You you got it. So you'll do great, I'm sure. Can you speak a little bit about your journey through Harvard? Obviously, you did really well while you were there. Um, was there what made that institution special for you? Because you spent over a decade there, right? Can you speak to what that experience was like? I know a lot of people out there have aspirations of going to a top tier school. You went to the top tier school, and did very well. Can you just talk a little bit about what that experience was like for you, and uh, maybe highlight any misconceptions there may be about it.
Mm, it's a really good question. I don't think I've ever been asked that on a podcast. So kudos to you, George, for thinking outside of the box there. I would say the best thing that came out of Harvard for me were the friendships. Um, I was randomly assigned to a dorm room with five other guys, and to this day we're like brothers.
Wow.
I would one of them ended up co-founding Buoy with me,
Mhm.
and then we also had some friends from upstairs, three women who also just became, just it became like a core group
Mhm.
that we're still friends to this day. So I'd say
That's awesome.
that's the best thing.
Mhm.
Second to that would likely be that um, the best thing that Harvard did for me was maybe like I don't know, instill this sense of like you know you can do it,
Yeah.
um,
Mm.
which I don't think. All right, I don't think that should be limited to just people that go to Harvard. I think
Certainly.
anyone can do anything. You don't have to go to
Yeah.
college. You could
Mhm.
still do whatever you want to do.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
and that's been proven by time and time again, just people with just some resilience, like being able to make it.
Mhm.
Obviously, there are circumstances that make things a lot easier for a lot of people.
Mhm.
But for me coming in, I came from a public high school, in Texas.
Mhm.
Parents are, immigrants. And I was kind of expecting, honestly, to see a really big discrepancy between me
Yeah.
and, say, the kid that went to private school,
Right.
grew up with a silver spoon, has a lot of relationships already because of kind of their family situation.
Mhm.
And like you do see that, like you see that from like a social hierarchy perspective. There's like,
Hmm.
oh yeah, like oh that person is so and so's kid,
Right.
and there's like that sense of like oh that's crazy.
Yeah.
Um, but then when it came down to like academics, like I was able to compete. Like
Mhm.
my high school like prepped me well enough for school that I was able to work hard and
Yeah.
study, and I was able to compete, against these like kids that I
Yeah.
was kind of worried that I wouldn't be able to kind of stand up to.
Mhm.
And then further, I found that if I took risk and if I did things in an unorthodox way, that that was okay, and that I would be rewarded for taking alternative paths
Mhm.
besides kind of the normal one.
Yeah.
And that was probably the best thing about Harvard was, you know, people didn't look didn't talk about like, oh, look at that person there like a consultant, or oh, look at that person there like a big banker. And
Hmm.
most of the stories are like, oh, look at that person, they like started a company. Oh, look at Zuckerberg, look at Bill Gates, look at, you're holding yourself to these people that did something
Right.
like really big. And
Right.
so I think for me personally, it was very inspiring to be like, oh, I don't have to kind of take the traditional path. I could just go do something
Yeah.
bigger. And
W- w-
that was the best thing about it.
Yeah. When did you know that you fit in? When did you know that, okay, I can compete? Did you ever have like doubts or insecurities like, wow, these people come from a great background, great schools, and I don't? When did you know that, okay, I belong here, I earned it, and I'm gonna do well?
Yeah, crazy enough, I actually remember that very distinct moment. So coming in, I was uh, gonna concentrate or major in economics, but I knew I was gonna try to go to med school. So there's this class, Life Sciences 1A, which was kind of like a screen out class, one of the first screen out classes for pre-med
Hmm.
uh, kids. And like the class had like 400 students in it or something, kind of like quite a few.
Yeah.
And what I had heard was that, um, the test scores are based on a curve. And so it's all relative. So
Hmm.
it's not, like above a 90 is an A or anything like that. It's basically how well do you score against your classmates kind of thing.
Hmm.
Um, and I remember studying for that test and just thinking the whole time I'm studying, like, oh shit, I'm not good enough. I'm coming from just middle of nowhere school in Katy, Texas. Like, there's no way I'm gonna be able to compete. And I
Hmm.
still remember I studied my butt off, walked out of the test, um, and I knew I crushed it. Like I just
Yeah.
knew
Nice.
it was good.
Yeah.
And I remember walking back to my dorm and being like, I can compete. And that was it kind of got the ball rolling, and
Yeah.
yeah, that's when I felt like I knew I could survive here.
Nice. That's awesome. Do you feel like there are any heightened expectations of you because you are a Harvard graduate? Do you ever, in general, do you ever get a sense that people expect more of you? And how do you handle that if that exists?
I don't know if I've ever asked anyone, honestly, whether they expect more of me. So I actually explicitly don't know.
Hmm.
I
I'm just
will
curious because
say,
yeah,
I will say that I think it's somewhat helpful just for people to be like, oh, this person's not. Probably like there's a sense of just like, oh, this person's probably not incompetent.
right.
So that's helpful. But I also do sense like there's probably I try not to talk about it, honestly. Like I
Yeah,
try not to
yeah,
talk about, like
yeah,
because if I mention it, they're gonna be like, oh, of course, rolls eyes, like this person is like full of themselves or whatever.
right, right.
Yeah, so I kind of just avoid chatting about it. This is probably the most I've talked about it in like
Yeah.
10 years.
Yeah, it's understandable, but it's clear you're humble about it, and you don't want to draw any like negative attention to it. But I think it is a remarkable accomplishment that you got there, you were successful, you found your confidence there, and you ultimately went on to co-found your own company, and that's worthy of recognition, right? And so you got to give credit where it's due.
Oh, thanks,
So
Judge.
yeah, of course. So pivoting to the start of Buoy, what was it? What motivated you to start this company? Um, what was sort of the driving force and motivation for you again to pivot away from medicine, from a career as a physician to do this? Because that's a big sacrifice, right? You raised over $67 million for this company. You dedicated a lot of time and work to bringing this off the ground. So, what was the driving force behind that? I know you touched on just doing the most good for the most people, right? But I also recall you speaking about the family connection it had, that you had someone in your family that was sick, and that if they had this tool, it would perhaps had a different outcome. But could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So I was in my last kind of rotation in med school, and it was in the emergency room. And I was
Mm,
seeing all these patients who are Googling their symptoms,
mm,
reading something online, and then largely just doing the wrong thing all the time.
mm,
So the the aha moment for me, it was like 2 a.m. It's like an overnight shift. I saw a woman who had a jammed finger. And then immediately after, I saw a man who had an ulcer on his foot from a history of poorly controlled diabetes. The
mm,
ulcer had become infected,
mm,
and we had to amputate his leg that night.
mm,
And I still remember talking to the first person and being like, "Hey, you're fine." Like, I actually don't even know. Like, why did you come in today? Why'd you wait in the emergency room for like 8 hours to see me?
mm,
And she was like, "Oh, I read online that my finger might be broken." And that's why she was there for her jammed finger.
mhm,
And then for the very next, person, I was like, "Sir, why didn't you come in like a day ago, 2 days ago to get this looked at? If you had come in earlier, we could have saved your leg probably." And he was like, "Oh, I also like," he didn't say also, but he was like, "Yeah, I Googled it and I
mm,
read something and decided, oh, I should just wait on it."
mm,
And then right around then, my dad got sick. He had a stroke. He didn't go to the doctor. I found out about it, much later.
mm,
And I was like, "Why didn't you call me?" I was like, "You're working. Okay. Why didn't you Google it?" I don't trust what I'd find on Google. And for me, that was very kind of an emotional tipping point. I took a
mm,
sabbatical from school
mhm,
and very delusionally decided, oh, I'm going to go fix this problem, which is the average person is having to make a lot of healthcare decisions throughout the
mm,
year.
mhm,
Many of those decisions are, in my opinion, all those decisions kind of it always depends.
mm, mm.
It always depends in a very clinical way.
Yeah.
So if you could just give people technology that could clear up the clinical implications of every decision,
Mhm,
you could make healthcare function much better
mhm,
because you wouldn't have this gatekeeper, which was seeing an expert when you're and seeing this expert. It's like really expensive. They're hard to find, hard to see.
mm,
Um, so we're trying to liberate, all of that decision making, put in the hands of the consumer, which
mhm.
is what we have been doing at Buoy for coming on 10 years now.
Man, that's remarkable, and kudos to you for doing this for people. I'm sure it's done a lot of good. Have you gotten what type of feedback have you gotten from consumers, um, uh, in how your company has impacted their life, how this technology has helped them? Have you gotten like direct feedback?
Yeah, every week our team actually looks at feedback that people send to us. So on the negative side, people will talk about like, "Hey, you forgot to kind of take this into consideration," or "Hey, you asked me this particular question, which should have nullified this as a potential diagnosis." And so those we'll get that kind of feedback. And then
Mhm.
on the positive side, it's a lot of it's like fear based. It's like, "Hey, thanks so much for calming me down. I was like really in my head
Mm,
about this situation. Um, Hey, thanks so much. I was about to run to the emergency room,
mm,
but it wasn't as serious as I thought it would be."
yeah,
So yeah, it's like really it's invigorating actually every week to kind of read through
yeah,
comments,
yeah,
uh, see
and
what the
that's
impact.
yeah, absolutely. And that's awesome that, you're saving people, like, that stress, and obviously the monetary, sacrifice of having to go to an ER for something that may not be a big deal, but you having that preliminary screen, and one that they can trust, is important. I think that's a value for sure. Uh can you talk a little bit about some of the highs and lows of running a company? Um, I know you've had a few that you've shared in the past, but would love for you to share that with this audience. You know, what were some of the initial highs for you? What were some of the lows? What were some of the maybe the points in time where, you know, you felt like, okay, this is something that's, you know, doing really well, or like, wow, we need to pivot, we need to figure things out. Would love to kind of hear about the ebbs and flows, because, you know, oftentimes we think of, you know, success in a straight line, but it's not. It's up, down, left, right, and, you know, we have to pivot and adapt. So would love to hear about the journey with as CEO of Buoy.
Yeah, it's a 10-year journey, so I'll try to be
Yeah, I know. I'm
think with it.
yeah, yeah,
I'd say some of the highs would include things like, raising our first round of angel funding, which it just felt amazing to get that kind of like validation,
for sure.
which I would say that sense of validation for raising money is in and of itself like a big trap, but we'll come back to that.
Mm,
So yeah, the first round we raised, our first institutional round where we had our first venture capitalists come in, that was a
mhm,
big milestone for us that felt really good.
mhm,
Uh, from a business perspective, when COVID happened and we adapted very quickly, right before actually COVID really hit, we had already adapted our AI to understand it.
mhm.
So we became the front door for the state of Massachusetts, the state of Virginia,
Wow.
uh, United Healthcare, Cigna, Humana. I think at our peak we had about 180 million people who had access to
Wow.
an enterprise version of Buoy specifically for COVID.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think probably the high there was when we launched with Massachusetts, our home state. We're
Yeah.
based in Boston,
Yeah.
and um, we sprinted for 2 weeks to translate the product into Spanish and then to set up our servers to be able to handle a massive influx of traffic, because they decided they wanted us to announce this product on live television
Mm,
during a press conference with the governor.
wow.
Yeah, so it was kind of a wild day. Like,
Yeah.
governor goes out, talks about the state of the pandemic, and they're like, "Hey, Andrew, like, come up here, talk about Buoy."
That's
And then,
amazing.
like, had to go up there and, like, had a little bit of a spiel.
Yeah.
And
So,
we saw the traffic to the site just explode, and we like it worked, like
yeah.
nothing broke. So that was really cool, just seeing us help during this global pandemic. Every few generational, once every few generations do you see,
Mhm.
such a terrible event happen, and so to be able to kind of help out there was felt
Yeah.
amazing. And then on the low side, I think the biggest lows were just stuff not working, and just figuring that out and coming to grips with it. And when I
Mhm.
say stuff not working, I really mean like the business isn't working.
Mm,
For instance, very early we started selling to health systems, and then we figured out, oh, actually, health systems and our product don't really align in terms of the business outcomes
mm,
that they're looking for versus like what we're driving. And so we shifted. We started selling to insurance companies and employers, and we took a huge bet there. Big insurance companies started investing in us. They rolled us out during COVID.
mhm,
And then, a few years down the line, you realize that, oh, that was the wrong move. There's a bunch of reasons why our product didn't really fit, as a product for an insurance company. And by then we'd have 120 employees.
mhm,
Probably 80% of them came on at some point for purposes of the go-to-market that supported the insurance companies.
mhm.
And I think the first time I went through a layoff as a CEO was just
Yeah.
terrible. Like,
Yeah.
I really like my teammates. I think we did an amazing job hiring
Mm,
really kind, smart, talented people. And every single person we had to say, that, look, I'm sorry, this isn't working out
mm,
for the company, felt like a really big failure on my part.
mm.
And we went through 3 rounds of layoffs. ultimately after, the last round of funding, fell through. And every single one of those were huge lows, just a horrible, pit in your stomach feeling.
Mm,
Um, so yeah, and then I think the high that we are on now is really one based on a reality of the business, which is we know how to make money, we know how to continue to make more money, and we understand how to keep our costs in line. And we
right.
understand that, a lifeline of money from venture capitalists is not a way to really build a business. And
Mm,
yeah, so it's, lessons learned with blood, I guess.
yeah. Yeah.
And sitting here 10 years later and learned a lot, done a lot of crazy stuff, but
Mm,
wouldn't change anything.
yeah.
Uh, Even though I feel like I look back and I can cringe at all the mistakes I made.
Certainly.
Just big learning experiences.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's part of life. We have, we put something out there and we have to iterate. Like even me on this podcast, like I've screwed up a lot, but I'm learning as I go. So, hopefully with every iteration I can get a little bit better. And that's my goal really. Um, are there any misconceptions about being a CEO? Like everybody wants to be a boss, they want to be, in charge and have responsibility and have their own company. Is there anything you would caution people about being in that role and what it entails? Is there anything that people are not thinking about when they want to start their own company and lead people?
I wouldn't say anything to discourage anyone from doing it,
Sure.
honestly.
Okay.
Um, on the contrary, I think there are a lot of people that should or could go do their own thing, start
Mm,
their own business, be their own boss, be the
mm,
boss of, you know, uh, their own life and their own journey and what they want to do.
mm,
And the barrier in the way is fear.
mm,
There's just a lot of fear in life. Um, I feel like there's this little person in your head who probably first was formed when we were really young,
mm,
when we were told not to do things or told this was wrong, and kind of affirmation by people around us was a currency that was really important to us. And so
mm,
this little person in our head was a protector who basically told us not to do things,
mm,
to kind of like fit in.
mhm.
We're like a social creature, so we're more of a social creature than we are anything else, and fitting in is really important. Now, that's the positive side of that little voice. The downside of that little voice is like when we get a little older and we kind of understand, hear the social norms, that little person is still there.
Yeah.
And their only job is to be like, hey, don't do that because you're going to be ridiculed, or you're going to lose face, or you're going to basically like suffer within like a social environment.
Mm,
And that voice has kind of like lost its usefulness to us, because a lot of times like that fear of like looking bad, amongst your colleagues, or looking bad to
mm,
your family, or looking bad, um, to your mentors or whatever, just
mhm,
like that fear of shame, that fear of messing up.
mhm.
In all honesty, like no one cares. And no
Yeah.
one, like if you tried and it didn't work, like no one
Yeah.
cares. So like the downside to doing stuff largely is just not there.
Mm,
And we just keep convincing ourselves that we can't do something or we shouldn't do something because of that little voice. So it becomes like a very, like, it started out as protective, and later on in life it becomes very destructive, or
mm,
inhibitory. Like we just prevents people from doing what they want to do.
yeah.
And um, so going back to like the misconceptions of a CEO, maybe the biggest misconception is that you have to be a certain way to do what you want to
Mhm,
what you want to do. Like
mhm.
I hope people don't look at me and like, oh, you got to go to Harvard or whatever
Right.
to be a CEO. Like, no, you don't. You
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
be anybody, and you can literally decide to take your life in your own hands
Mm.
and do what you want to do. And obviously, there's going to be people that are going to be like, oh, well, I got to pay the bills. I got to, and yeah, that's true. You do have to pay the bills. And,
Mhm.
if that's the situation that you're in. But most successful companies or most successful entrepreneurs actually start off doing something on the side. That's actually like a really interesting finding.
Yeah.
Adam Grant talks about it in his book, The Originals. Most people think you have to like quit your job and like kind of go all in. No, like actually the best businesses come from people that do something on the side, kind of like validate their assumptions.
Mhm.
And then only after you're starting to get a lot of momentum, they're like, oh, actually, you know what? I can leave my job and go do this thing full time.
Yeah.
Uh, so people should be starting their own side hustles and doing those side hustles, not necessarily just to create a little bit of money, but doing the side hustle to, pursue something they like really are passionate about and they feel like, can lead to economic freedom, but in a
Mhm.
way that like they're excited about, not just for
Yeah.
purposes of making money. So anyways,
Fair.
long-winded answer, George,
No,
but
it's great. It's great. No, it's great. And I think in addition to that, there's also the growth associated with pursuing your goals and having that side hustle. Like you're going to learn so much about yourself, about the business, about the industry, and it really helps us, to be the best version of ourselves. Because we're stretching ourselves to be more than just a 9 to 5. Um, which is nothing wrong with that, but I think it's a higher calling because now, at some point you may be hiring people, providing, them a livelihood, right? And I think that's a huge responsibility, and um, that's why it really resonated with me when you talked about, having to go through your layoffs, that would be probably the most painful thing for me too. And I don't think people expect to have to ever do that, right? But you never know, market conditions change all the time. So there's the glory to being a CEO and having your own company, but there's also, things that maybe are not so glorious. So it's choices and trade-offs, right? Um, so what's next for you? What's next for Buoy? What are some upcoming milestones that you're excited about? I know you talked about you touched on, you guys know how to make money. You're got your market position where you want it. Anything that you're excited about in the coming days?
yeah, quite a few. I think the nearest term is it's been a real renaissance period for AI,
Yeah.
and our product has been around. Someone said to me recently, like, you guys were AI before AI. It made me laugh.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we've been working on our AI product for a long time, and now with um, these new technologies like large language models, it's going to allow us to do things that just like were unfathomable 12 months ago.
Wow.
And so we're expanding our product scope to be able to essentially be able to help you answer any question you have in healthcare,
Wow.
whether it's what's the likeliest diagnosis to what's the right insurance plan for me,
Wow.
what's the right lab I should be getting,
Yeah.
what's the best supplement for someone like me, what's the best prescription medication for someone like me. Um,
That's
so we
huge.
we yeah, we're working on it. We have a the first iteration of it out live now for a good amount of our traffic, and we have kind of the next ones coming. So that's like short term, like a lot of excitement. Midterm, looking to reach profitability over the next few months, which is exciting.
Yeah.
And then longer term, you know, I would really want to build like a membership model that starts to be an alternative to people who are unsatisfied with their insurance plans.
Mhm.
So giving them something that creates almost like a Costco like experience for people where, yeah, you have to pay for services, but those services are like at cost, as inexpensive as possible, and everything is like transparent and above board, and you can kind of understand how to navigate, which sounds so easy and fundamental, but it just
Mhm.
doesn't really exist in healthcare out of a few pockets of different companies. So,
Mm.
with our user base as it is, we just want to provide better and better products and services for them.
Love that. That's exciting. That's huge because I can already see a use case for me. I was signing up for benefits. I was like, oh, what's the right plan for me? I don't know. Like, it'd be nice to just like throw this in chat. I actually did go into chat GPT and it gave me some standard answer
Mm.
for my question. Basically go to their website and, read their terms and conditions, right? But to have something that would, you know, give me guidance and a direction would be super helpful. So that's exciting. I'm excited for you
Thanks.
guys.
Yeah, I appreciate
Um, any closing advice for the audience, whether it's in starting your own business or going through college, pursuing a top tier school, or just life in general? Anything that you want to leave with the audience?
I'd probably say, as if, your audience is kind of getting ready to go to college and, really entering adulthood,
Mm,
that in that life stage, I'd say first, college is amazing and you should really enjoy your time in college,
mm,
make friendships, make time for being young,
yeah.
because that time goes away very quickly and life hits you fast. Um, and I think shortly thereafter, I think one of the biggest problems with our educational system is that we crave the structure of going from one level to the next. It's like, oh, okay, after first grade, second grade, and after 12th grade is college, freshman year, sophomore year, junior year.
Yeah.
And, if people in the audience are seniors in college, they probably feel this already. It's like, well, what do I do after?
Yep.
And that uncertainty is very troubling. I think it's very scary
Mhm.
because we just didn't face that. We weren't trained to like be in that uncertain zone for
Yeah.
our whole life.
Right.
And I would say maybe my recommendation would be is to think more than just think, actually spend time trying to find the thing that makes you tick
Mhm.
as early as possible in your kind of life, such that you can go and pursue that very intentionally.
Mhm.
Um, and what I mean by that is there's so much inertia that kind of comes into play post college because the social pressure is to find a job immediately, and you
Yeah.
go find that job, and what happens when you get a job? Some money starts flowing in, you start increasing your costs in
Yeah.
your life. You rent an apartment, you get a dog, like whatever it may be,
Mhm.
you start spending to basically what you're making. And that creates this inertia of like, well, okay, I guess I have to stay at my job. I have to get a raise. I have to go look for another job if I want to change jobs, but it's going to be in the same, like, it's going to kind of like project right off of like what I previously
Yeah.
went to. It's very hard to do that kind of hard pivot
Yeah.
the more your fixed costs rise. So you
True.
make more money, your costs kind of go up. You have a mortgage, you have a kid, blah, blah, blah. And so
Mm.
very soon it becomes very challenging to like make changes as you get older,
Mm.
because your fixed costs are kind of rising alongside your how much you're making.
Mhm.
And then ultimately, like next thing you know, you like retire and then you die. And that's it. We
Yeah.
have one shot.
Yeah.
And so if you think about like when you have like the most opportunity to course correct or put yourself on a great course, it's when your fixed costs are lowest.
Right.
And when is that? It's like, okay, when I'm straight out of college, I have nothing really. Yeah, I have college debt, which is in and of itself a huge pain in the butt.
Yeah.
I would I would say that's like one of the biggest problems. But let's say you're able to go on to like a kind of um, kind of income-based repayment plan.
Mhm.
Spending that time to just think and try out different career paths to
Mm.
then say, okay, you know what, I really love doing this, and then just going and doing it,
Yeah.
and then learning how to deal with that voice in your head that's telling you like, oh, it's not gonna work, it's not gonna fail. Like let it go, because like, what's the worst case that happens if it fails? Literally, okay,
Yeah.
few more years of interest. I mean, what is that in the grand scheme of things? Like, I'll go
Mm.
find out what I need to do. So,
Yeah.
anyways, I guess long story short, there's a lot of inertia in life, and there's only one chance to go for it.
Yeah.
The earlier in life you're gonna go for it, the better off you are, because you get to spend more years doing things you love doing.
Love that. And that's a great point you made because I was talking to someone about this just last week. Like it's people approaching college or going through college, like they often don't know what they want to do. And so when they're in the process of trying to choose an institution to go to and choose a career path, like they get hit with all this anxiety because now it's like time to start making decisions that will impact your future like directly. Um, but it's also important to like you got to try things. You got to, get put yourself out there and not be worried about, failure because we have to learn. We have to figure things out. And again, that's the whole idea behind the show is just giving people, alternate paths to learn from other people and like, hey, this is what you could do. This is how he did it. And success is not a straight line. People have to figure things out as they go and get better and iterate. But yeah, it's a lot of pressure for folks, when they don't know what to do and they're still young, they don't really know themselves yet, and you have to make major life decisions moving forward. Andrew, thank you so much for your time and again, very privileged to have you. Congratulations again on Max and on your business because I think it's very exciting. I love the direction you guys are headed and can't wait to see uh wait to see where it goes. So I
Thanks,
appreciate you
George.
so
Thanks for
much.
having me.
Yeah,
Appreciate
man.
you letting me kind of ramble on for
No,
appreciate it.
no, you did great, man. Thank you so much.